Recording. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I am pleased to be joined by one of my favorite guys in the business who I've been honored to interview a couple of times in the past, Dr. Peter Linneman. Dr. Linneman, thank you so much for joining me before we even get into it.
Hi, great to have you and great to do this from the home of the Super Bowl champions.
I was cheering emphatically for the Eagles on that game. I love to see it. That was such a great victory. The whole city must be going crazy.
They went more than crazy, I think it's fair to say.
So can they repeat now? It looks like a pretty solid
Of
team.
course, of course, of course. Never in doubt, right?
Well, that'll be one of many things to watch in 2025 as everything seems to be crazy and unpredictable right now. I wanted
Yeah.
to start by getting
Actually, if I might, Chad, do one insertion on that. We're talking about Super Bowls and so forth. And I've made this point before to people that the yield curve, we all look at the yield curve. What's the 10-year treasury? What's the 9-year? What's the 5-year treasury and so forth? You do realize that that's like trying to predict today who's going to win the Super Bowl 10 years from now, 9 years from now, 8 years from now, 10 years from now. By the way, you know how stupid it, I mean, I don't mean stupid, it's just is what it is, right? In other words, if I put a gun to your head and said, okay, who's going to be the Super Bowl 10 years from now, you're going to say something. But all the players are going to be different. The coaches are going to be different, probably new stadiums. The opponents are going to be all new players, right? And on a 10-year, right? And even on a 5-year, right? And when you see the market, and I don't have a better solution than the market, but it's a good reminder to people as we segue from talking about something fun to something kind of financial. All you're doing is trying to figure out who the Super Bowl winner is 10 years from now, 9 years from now, 8 years. And what makes it funnier, Chad, is something will happen. The Fed does something or the Fed does nothing, or inflation data comes out and it's 6 bips higher. And you understand and the 10-year changes and the 5-year changes and the 3. And that's like saying that after the third play of the first game next season, we change our bet on who's going to win the Super Bowl 10 years from now, 5 years from now. Not just who's going to win the game, but who's going to win it 5 and 10 years from now. So I just wanted, I'm not saying you wanted to go there, but I think it's a good thing for people to bear in mind, in the sense that we're going to know when we know, right? 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say, that's true on picking a Super Bowl winner. It's true on. So anyway, enough said on that topic.
I think that's such a great analogy, though. And that is what's driving so many decisions right now is the 10-year treasury.
Sure.
And even trying to predict who's going to win 10 years from now, that is what has such a large impact on the market is the bond market trying to predict what's going to happen 10 years from now and making decisions today. It is such a great analogy.
And they're never right. Notice I can't do better than them. That's the oddity of markets. I can't do better, but I know it's probably wrong. It's probably not wrong about predicting tomorrow, literally, but 10 years, 5 years, it's wrong. And so I think people lose sight of that. And it really would be, the new season starts in September, and let's say the Eagles fumble on the first play, and you go, oh, well, now I'm going to reduce their chances of winning the Super Bowl 10 years from now. Not this year, 10 years from now, based on one play, right? Anyway, yeah. A lot of noise is the point. A lot of noise, and we forget just how much noise there is. And
And
would people have predicted Washington being one of the final 4 teams 10 years ago? Not a chance. Not a chance, right? I'm not even sure they would have predicted Kansas City 10 years, much less the Eagle. So it's a good, be humble kind of point.
I completely agree. I think it is noise. I think that's how everybody has to look at it is, and to a certain extent, everything we'll talk about today will be adding to that noise because we'll be talking about things that we can't possibly expect to know either, but it still makes good conversation.
Well, it's you. I actually like to view what I say is trying to reduce noise because we've talked enough, Chad. And one of the things I think you would agree is I just kind of try to focus on basics.
Hmm.
I don't get caught up in fads. I'm not saying I'm always right, of course not, but I try to strip things down to their basics and try to clear the haze of pure noise. And you were saying how there's a lot of noise. I made the comment to somebody that this is the right now is like being in an 8 by 10 room full of ping pong balls with things written on them with huge, huge fans blowing the ping pong balls everywhere. And one ping pong goes by and it says, settling the Ukraine war, and another ping pong goes by, says 25% tariffs on Germany, and another ping pong ball goes by and it says close USAID, and another goes by the Fed's going to not cut rates. And it's like there's so many ping pong balls going around. And I think if you try to ignore how many ping pong balls are flying around and focus on, okay, here's some basic things, right? Here's some very basic things that, yep, we're not going to get exactly right. I think it helps a lot. In other words, just instead of trying to grab each ping pong ball as it goes flying by.
Even trying to observe all the ping pong balls flying by is a job in itself because you're trying to track all these different things while new ones are coming in and other ones are going out. That it's even
Exactly.
without even
Exactly.
reading the ping pong balls, just trying to get a sense of all of them is a big order.
Exactly. I think that's well said.
What ping pong balls would you be looking at right now then? Which if you could just say, all right, we're
Yeah.
turning the fan off and we're only going to focus on the key ones, what are they?
So, I, as you know, I focus on um, job growth, and job growth remains pretty solid. Um, we are 5 months, almost 5 months past when we shut, 5 years, excuse me, past when we shut the economy down in March of 2020. Not just we, the world. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't mean just the US. And we kept it shut down anywhere from 9 months to 3 years, depending on where in the world and what. Um, if we would have said, literally 5 years ago, if we'd been having this and I'd have said, imagine you can't have elective surgery, imagine you can't visit your dying grandmother, imagine you can't fly to Europe without special permission, imagine there are no ball games to go to, you can't go to the theater, all the Disney is completely closed. Vegas casinos are completely. It's crazy. And I said, but humor me. If that happened, how long do you think it would take from when we said enough um, for the world to get back to normal? And I think you and everybody else would say, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, right? And it's taken 3 to 5 years. It's 5 years since it began, but in some cases, it's only 2 years since it ended, right? It's not even 2 years since China eased a lot of things.
Mhm.
So what do I track? I track, are we close to normal? How close are we to normal? How do I track normal? Trends are not perfect, but they're helpful. So real GDP, not a perfect measure of the economy, but not a terrible one. It's back to within about 0.7% of trend. And when we've talked in the past, it was well below trend, well below. What's that say? I'm not saying trend is perfect, but it's something. And therefore, we're getting close to normal. If anything, we're slightly below normal. Being slightly below normal means we probably have normal plus a little tailwind in the economy as we move forward. What's the tailwind? People are still getting cataract surgery because they weren't able to get it and they delayed it, and they've delayed it for a year and a half, but their vision's gone so bad they finally are going in, but they would have gone in 2020 had it not gone all crazy, and just on and on. Travel, still taking travel. So there's still a little bit of tailwind. We're only in what else do I look at? We're in just starting the fourth year of a recovery. Recoveries tend to last 6 to 10 years. You don't have recessions when you're worried about recessions. You tend to have recessions when you're not worried about recessions. And as you know, every time we've done this, people are saying, oh, we're going to have a recession. And I say, no, we're below trend. We have a lot of pent up demand, a lot of good things still happening. So that I watch. I watch employment. One of the things I watch is weekly unemployment claims. That is, people who actually went and signed up for the first time for unemployment claims. It had been quite low for several, with little blips, been quite low. And today it blipped up about 25,000 over the previous week. And you kind of go, let's think about that. That's a ping pong ball, right? And then you go, does that pass the smell test that blip up is some combination of blips that happen, noise, and some of the federal employees going and signing up for unemployment? You go, yeah, that does. Does that mean the economy is falling apart? No. If we now go back to fundamentals. Let's try to take noise out rather than putting noise in. So if we got rid of a third of federal workers, I'm not saying we will, but imagine we got rid of a third of federal workers. That would be about 0.5% of the labor force, just of jobs. About 0.5, about 0.5%. If nobody of those who got let go got a job this year, so they didn't get a new job, right? They all stayed unemployed. That would cut job growth from about 1.2% to minus 0.5%. 1.7%. We'd still get job growth, but it gives you a parameter of how bad. To the extent that those people get jobs elsewhere, it would be even more minimal. And you go, I don't worry about that bringing the world to an end. It's obviously traumatic to those individuals, but that's always true of those situations. So you go, not awful. Another ping pong ball. Let's try to take noise out. Tariffs. We're going to raise, billions and trillions, and it's going to 30% increase and a 50% increase in tariffs and so forth, right? All that ping pong ball. All right, let's do facts. Let's try to take some noise out. Basically, during the Bush years, the Obama years, and the first two years of Trump, if we, the United States, bought $100 of imported items, there was a $2 tariff on them, on average. Okay, that's just data. The last 2 years of Trump, and remember all the rhetoric of how much and how much and how much, and we're going to tariff, and okay, the tariff went to $3 on $100 purchased. Now, one way to view that is the tariff went from $2 on 100 to $3 on 100, which is a 50% increase in the tariff, right? Going from 2 to 3. 50% increase. Another way to view it is it was basically a 1% increase in the cost of imported items. They used to cost 100. and 2, and now they cost 103. Okay, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you hear the 1%, you get a very different heart rate than when you hear 50%, right? They're both true, right? Is it surprising that a 1% increase in the cost of imports, which were 15% of the economy, didn't melt the economy down? The answer is, of course not. You then say it stayed at $3 per hundred during the Biden years. Okay. So the last 2 years of Trump and all 4 years of Biden, it was $3 per hundred. Okay. Let's assume that Trump does a 60% increase in tariffs. Okay. That would take it up to 100, that would take it up to 5, right? From 3 up to 5 on 100. Well, you say, well, that's a 66% increase in tariffs. Or it's a little less than a 2% increase in the cost of imported items, which make up 15% of the economy. And when you do the math of a 2% increase on 15% of the economy, pretty small. It's big to the people dealing with it, but to the economy as a whole, kind of takes some of the noise out. Now, I'm not saying I'm for tariffs. I'm just trying to say, let's have some perspective here as we do this. What I'm watching is I watch employment. The best estimates, they're not my estimates, the best I've been able to find, kind of consensus, is we probably have around 15 million illegal immigrants in the country, and probably around 10 million of them are working. Now, I don't know if that's precise, but around. And of course, it's a high ratio of working because it's hard for them to go on welfare. It's hard for them to, they're very young, so they're more likely to be working age and so forth, all right? So, okay, so we have 10 million workers. Well, we have 162 million total workers in the economy. And you go, ooh, 10 million is a lot, right? It's a lot. That's probably up versus the Biden years by about 4.5 million. Okay. Both on the illegal and so, okay. Suppose we deport 1 million. We deport 10, not quite 10%, right? We take the 15 million, let's say we deport 1.5 million. Okay. So we deport 1.5 million. And that cuts, let's assume it's the same ratio. We go from 10 million workers to 9. Okay. Economy is still going to function. Still going to function. Maybe not as efficiently, maybe not as effectively. Certain sectors will be hit much harder than others. But it's like, well, the world's not going to stop spinning. It's not saying do it. It's just saying have some perspective. What do you think would happen, Chad? And remember what? The Republicans have a 4-seat advantage in the House, I think. I may be off, but it's very slim. Namely, they have to be careful when they vote on something contentious that everybody's in town if they want to carry the House, okay? So what do you think happens if the administration tries to deport 5 million workers this year? Everybody is going to call, everybody who has those workers is going to call their representative. Do you doubt that?
Not at all.
They're going to call their representative. Maybe not if it's 10 people, right? So if 10 people are deported, you're not probably calling your representative. 20, probably not. 40, I think if you try to do 5 million, there are going to be a lot of phone calls to a lot of representatives, and there's going to be a lot of close votes, and they're going to say, don't count on me unless we can work something here, right? Do I know that? No, but it makes, step back from all the noise. It just makes sense. It just makes sense that that's going to happen. And so do I think we get 1 million? million and a half deported beyond normal this year? Probably. But all that's doing is making up for what didn't get deported. Labor markets aren't going to disappear, but it will be an adjustment for firms that use a lot of those workers. So those are kind of when you say, what am I? Inflation. I'm looking at inflation. Lots of noise. Lots of different core and with energy and without and whatever and eggs. It's like a ping pong ball just went by with eggs on it, right? And then you sit and you think, okay, take a deep breath. Let's look at the data. This is not Peter's data. This is the data. And you go, good news is for about 80,000 items that they track, it's down to upper 2%. Okay. They want it to be at 2, but that's a made up number. There's nothing magic about 2 versus 3 versus 1, but it's just a number. Okay. You kind of, thank God the world doesn't stop spinning if it's 2.6 instead of 2. But more importantly, if you actually look at the data, you'll see that it's all being driven by housing. All being driven by housing. And it's being driven, I think we talked about it before, by this concept, owner equivalent rent, which no one pays. It's the rent that an owner theoretically pays to themselves. And no one thinks about this. Well, the data says that the rent that you pay to yourself, which you never thought about, I'm willing to bet that your listeners went through the entire past year and the idea never occurred to them in terms of their expenses. It's up 6%. And it's 25% of the price index. And you go, that's where all the increase is coming from. If you take that out, we're well below 2%. Take out one item that nobody buys and only leave in items that people buy. And you get below 2%. You go, I feel pretty good. And so is it perfect? No, but it's take a deep breath, get off the headlines, focus on the reality. Eggs are way up, but you don't focus on the fact that most of your groceries are not way up, right? Most of your groceries are not way up. Go look at your bill. Most of your groceries are not way up. Eggs are up because they've culled the herd. I don't know what flock, I guess, whatever a bunch of chickens are. So again, what you can see, I'm trying to take noise out. Mm-hmm. And then you go, okay, you and I have had these conversations. What do I track? Capital flows. I'm obsessed with capital flows. Why? Because in my experience, capital flows basically determine prices, not interest rates, but capital flows. If the interest rate's high and capital flows, values will hold, cap rates will come down, et cetera. And if interest rates are low and money stops flowing, values are going to get eroded, cap rates are going to go up. And I've done research on this. It meets common sense. So I'm obsessed with following capital flows. And I have a couple of metrics, and capital flows remain well below normal for real estate. They've been that way for almost 2 years now. It'll eventually end because normal by definition means we eventually go back to it. Financial crisis, 2009 was awful, 2010 was awful. It'll never get better by 2012, not so bad. Not so bad. It's not unlike winter. The weather has been awful here, just awful. It'll never get better. Well, yesterday was quite nice. 59 degrees in Philadelphia, I guess. And a week ago, you're saying it'll never change. They do change. These things ebb and flow. And capital will return. And when it does, cap rates will go down because the money's got to find a home. How do I know money is not flowing? You're in the business. You know that transaction volumes are below average, right? You can go to the data sources, but just, transaction volumes are below average. That means capital's not flowing normal, right? Just almost by definition. Is it surprising if capital's not flowing per normal, that values are under pressure? what do you think happens to the same values if a lot more money flows? We haven't got any more properties for that. We have the same number of properties. If we suddenly had 20% more money, we still have the same number of properties. And that money's got to flow to those properties. Oh, it'll bid the prices up, which is to say cap rates down. So I watch capital flows. Capital flows are thawing. It's a little like Philadelphia right now. It's not as bad, but it's hardly July here, right? Hardly July. July will come. Trust me, July and August will come, and we'll be wishing we had cool days. And, you remember when money really flowed, and you remember when money didn't. So those are the kind of things I try to track, but I try to track them in a way to take out noise. Now, will there be noise around everything I just said? Of course. Of course. But try to see through it. That's a long answer, but.
Well, it was a great answer, and it was funny as you were mentioning that and talking about inflation specifically. The image came to mind of being in one room with the fan and the ping pong balls, and then opening a door that says inflation, and in that room there's another fan with more ping pong balls. Because you're right, I think there's just noise everywhere we look, and it's so hard to pick out what's meaningful and what's not. And I wanted to dive into it a little bit more and get your sense on what's happening in some of the specific asset classes. So office is an interesting one from the standpoint that it's had a massive shock in 2020. And it was already some rumblings before that. It was already a little bit on shaky ground, and then 2020 just got crushed. But I want to talk about industrial as well. But I'm curious to your thoughts on office. A lot of talk about return to work. There's also a lot of in the news about properties that have sold at huge discounts or have gone into receivership. So there is pain in that market. Looking back on the last 5 years at that downward trend that it's been on, do you see that it's hit a trough and we're going to start seeing a recovery, or where do you place office right now?
I think office, and you described it well, just got slammed. And it got slammed both in the rent and occupancy side of it and in the capital market side of it, right? It got hit double whammy. And there are some challenges of, are people going to come back? Now, I've said since day one, people will come back by and large, because most people, most of the time, for most tasks, work better at the office than they do not at the office. That's why for centuries, people have gone to an office, right? I mean, it was a survival kind of mechanism. And we are seeing people come back more and more. I think it's fair to say that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, pretty much everybody's in. Mondays, close to everybody's in. And most places, Friday is a national holiday. I said a year and a half ago that we forget that 100 years ago, people worked 10 hours on Sunday. And they worked 10 hours on Saturday, and the work week was the typical work week. I don't mean for a workaholic, was like 60 hours a week, because you had to work that much to survive. And then as we got more productive, just think of getting 1.5% more productive a year. You don't notice it in a year, but you do that for a decade, you're 20% more productive, which means, well, I'll take half of it by working less and half of it in more pay, and then do that for another decade. You take half of it in working less and half of it in getting more pay. And so we've gone, even over my lifetime, we've gone from around a 42-hour work week to where pre-pandemic we were at around a 36-hour average work week in society. We may be witnessing, and I think it's very possible, that we're just witnessing one more of that evolution. There's nothing magic about We call it 40 hours a week, but it was really 36 hours a week if you look at it statistically. I think there's a real good chance we've evolved to a 32-hour work week as the kind of norm. And you say, well, how do we get by? And you go, okay, we're going to work 10% less hour wise, but versus 20 years ago when we've got there, 20 years at 1.5% a year, right? We're kind of 40% more productive. So we're going to work, right? A bit less, but we're still making more net net. And so I think there is a good chance that the not working on Friday or not coming in on Friday or Friday being a weekend, let's put it that way, is just one more evolution in society. I do think people are back. You need offices if people are back 4 days a week. Office, I think good office bottomed out about 12 months ago. You're seeing the bottoming out of average office, I think, around now. And the weak office has got real problems. But remember, one of the things that gave weak office lifespan was WeWorks. And if you go back, if we'd have had a conversation in 2000, I had these conversations with people in 2010, which is what's going to happen to all those not so good office buildings, right, that are struggling and so forth. We'd have said, well, they'll be gone in 10 years, 12 years. And then WeWorks showed up and leased a lot of them, not all of them, but they leased a lot of them. And they got a little extra life. Well, WeWorks is gone. And so now you're back to fundamentals. And they should have died over the last 10 years, 12 years. And with WeWork on, they're going to die in 6 years instead of 12 years, something like that. So, and it's a little like shopping centers went through. The good shopping centers will always do well, but it's constant work. The good office buildings will do well, constant struggle. The weak office will get sorted out. And some will get abandoned, some will get torn down, a few will get converted into resi. We're doing a couple of those. So I think the office is at least showing signs of life. I think last quarter in New York was the best net leasing quarter they've ever had. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is probably the preceding 3 years were the worst they've ever had, right? So there's a bit of pent up, but there's signs of life in office.
Yeah, I'm seeing that as well. On the industrial side, there's something that you said one time when we talked, I think it was about 5 years ago, on warehouses, about how the demand has been accelerating for decades, really going back to the early 2000s with the emergence of e-commerce. And
Right.
that was fuel was thrown on that in 2020. And you made the comment that we will overbuild. We always overbuild. And
Yeah.
sure enough, we've overbuilt big box warehouses in almost every market. I want to get your thoughts on the other side of industrial as well, because there's a few interesting topics there. But on the big box warehousing, where do you see that? And I guess I'd frame that by also throwing in that new construction starts have slowed down to low levels, that we're not adding in a lot of new inventory as well. So we've got a surplus in many markets. Most major markets, Phoenix, Dallas, have way too much warehouse space right now. With construction starts down or tempered at least, where do you put big box warehousing right now? And any guesses on what you think that looks like in the next year or two?
Well, it's interesting. The markets that got most ahead of themselves were the fastest growth markets, right? That's the bad news in the near term, but in the long term, it's good news, which is they have real growth. Dallas has real growth. Phoenix has real growth. Houston has real growth. It has growth because The economy will continue to grow. They'll continue to add people in those markets. Those people will continue to have more income. There may be a down cycle, but they'll have more income. That means they'll buy more stuff. And companies to serve them will need to store more stuff. And it'll get absorbed, and it'll get absorbed faster than people think. Because interestingly, it's not like the demand died. It was the supply overwhelmed the demand, right? And I mean, the demand in warehouse kind of went from frenetic to normal, but it's not like demand disappeared. It's just that it stopped being frenetic, right? And so it'll get absorbed. I feel pretty good about warehouse. And then you come down to the smaller, and I think some of the small bay stuff is very interesting. It, as you know, it's very management intensive. I mean, it's almost like you're running an apartment building for stuff, right? I mean, there's some landlords who are leasing out a couple thousand feet. Well, that's what an apartment does, right? Is lease out, or self-storage does, is lease out really small amounts on 1 to 3 year leases. It's all about, if I'm willing to hustle and I've got good social media to attract those tenants, and I stay on top of it, and I make sure I don't let them get behind on their payments, and if they do, I move them through, you'll do pretty well with that stuff. If what you're going to do is manage it like a big box, you got a hard time.
Yeah, and there's such a big difference. And interestingly, as the market ebbs and flows, a lot of people have gone from looking at warehouse, the big box stuff, and saying, okay, well, there's just a lot of inventory. This could take a bit of time to work through. All of a sudden, they look at this small bay inventory where the vacancy rate in a lot of markets is virtually zero,
Yeah,
and they say, okay, well, here's an opportunity, but it's such a different asset. As you said, you're dealing with small non-credit tenants on short-term leases that need their hands held through the entire process, and you might be managing 30 of them versus managing one 3PL in a
absolutely.
logistics building.
And you can't borrow as much because they're not credit, right? And the lender wants credit, so you can't borrow as much. So you have to write a little bit bigger proportionate check. But it's an interesting niche, and it didn't get overbuilt because that's not where the demand was. The demand was bigger procurement type of stuff, bigger logistic type stuff. On the other hand, remember, online sales are still growing. Online still uses a lot more space than traditional, and it will continue to absorb that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think it's nearly as bad as some people have made it out to be. I think there's going to be a little bit of pain. I think that it's going to take a little bit of time to absorb. But for the companies that have big holding power and they've got assets that are full, and perhaps they're at 95% occupancy instead of 100, I think that they'll weather it just fine. On the manufacturing side, this is one I'm really curious to get your sense on, because the other buzzword that's percolated in the last few years is onshoring and reshoring. And I guess if we even back this up to the late 70s, early 80s, when we offshored everything to China and China became the world's factory.
Right.
Now there's a big appetite to try and bring it back. And whether it's a economic tension that we have with China or just the appetite to make things on the continent again, that's picked up. But I've seen so far that's primarily been high tech, so gigafactories, EV plants, semiconductor, and a lot of that was the CHIPS Act and Inflation Reduction Act that was just throwing a lot of money to incentivize those ones. But steel is struggling, so U.S. steel
Yes.
is under pressure trying to sell. I haven't seen a lot of actual traditional manufacturing come back. Primarily labor costs, I'm sure, is the big one. But that's the buzzword, is everybody's saying reshoring, onshoring. When you're looking at all the data and all the trends and cutting out all the noise, where do you put reshoring, onshoring, and in the sense of manufacturing right now?
There'll be big headlines and not a lot of action. But whatever action occurs will get a big headline. And some of it's not even going to be reshoring. Namely, there were going to be some facilities open up in the United States no matter what. We're a big country, we're a growing country, the people are moving around in it. To deal with that, you have some growth required. People will call it reshoring for political purposes, but not a lot. Look, what is the US good at? The US is good at making capital available. I mean, if you think globally, we're really good at making capital available. Not perfect, but we're really good at making capital available. We're really good at making technology available. I'm not saying we're the best, but we're really good at that. We're quite good at security, that what you do is secure. If all you're going to do is bend metal, you can bend metal with a lot cheaper labor, right? And so to the extent it moves down the value add chain, we're not where it should occur. And it's a waste of our resources to make it occur here. Now you can say, okay, if it's a national defense or something, we've got to provide it. We subsidize it to the point, but not everything is national defense. And so we're good at high value add. I think people look at it wrong. You know, people looked at, I grew up in a manufacturing city, and it was surrounded by farm areas. And you think of all the boys that were captured in the old days behind a horse, walking along, pulling a plow, right? It didn't matter if they were smart or dumb. Somebody had to put that around them and do it, right? Well, thank God young boys don't have to do that now. They can go be engineers, and they can go be doctors, and they can go be computer technicians, and they can go be brokers, and they can go be all kinds of much more high value add. Same with manufacturing. I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and you know, it was brutal. It was brutal in those factories. People were broken by the age of 50, 60 years old. They were missing fingers and all these kind of things. It was brutal. We have moved beyond that. We've freed up those people who were being broken to work in hospitals and drive ambulances and do all kinds of wonderful things that are higher value add. So will there be some onshoring at the margin, but not big? Nor should it be big. It's funny. We are the richest large country in the history of the world. We're the most powerful military force in the history of the world. I think you'd agree with both of those factually, okay? Yet, my entire lifetime, and I'll be 74 next month, all we do is run around saying, we have people putting unfair trade terms on us. And you go, wait a minute. We're the biggest, most powerful. What are the odds that we have disadvantaged trade terms with all of our trading partners? What are the odds of that? Do you think the Romans had unfair trade advantages against them, or the Greeks, or the Carthaginians, or the Ottomans, or of course not. Of course not. The Soviets. We're the biggest, baddest thing the world has ever seen. Mean bad in a good sense, right? And probably, if anything, terms of trade are advantageous to us. Just realistically, that story passes a smell test rather than, oh, woe is me, we're so bad and nobody treats us fairly, you know? And we've got it pretty good. We got it pretty good. Not perfect. Focus on what we can do.
So what is that? What can we do?
High value add, high technology, high care. When I say care, precision, for lack of a better word, right? Precision. One of the things we've done that people don't really grasp is we've allowed people without extremely high technical skills to act as if they do. I don't know about you. I don't have extremely high technical skills anymore in terms of communication. And yet here we are because others have made it doable and made us more productive in the process, right? Massively more productive. You can circulate this to thousands of people with ease,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you didn't have to do the programming and so forth. What we do well is create, innovate, grow, provide capital, high value add. What we do badly is low value add, right? I mean, anybody can swing a hammer. I don't mean a carpenter, I mean a kind of sledging on rocks. Not anybody. I did that in my youth. I don't think I could do that anymore at 74. But, you know, or not for long when I say anybody. No, I mean, we do some things amazing. I'll tell you one thing we do amazing. All right. You want to know something we do amazing? Why does the US have a trade deficit? It's not disadvantageous trade terms. Okay, might be a little here and there. It's because we have the largest, most transparent, most honest capital market in the world. Okay. Is it a perfect capital market? Nope. There are Bernie Madoffs. And you know there are Madoffs still floating around. There are scam artists still floating around. Are all transactions financial completely transparent? Nope. But I'll tell you what, we are the largest, most liquid, most transparent, most honest market, capital market in the world. That we do brilliantly. Why do we have a trade deficit? We have a trade deficit. Imagine the following. You win $100 million tomorrow. After taxes, you win $100 million in the lottery tomorrow. Are you going to feel the need to invest in Myanmar or the Ukraine or Qatar or Guyana? No. Never's going to cross your mind. Not going to cross your mind. What are you going to do with your $100 million that you're going to invest? You're going to do 98% of it in the US and a little bit outside the US, mostly in Western Europe and Japan, right? Fair enough?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Why would somebody who lives in Guyana or somebody who lives in Qatar or somebody who lives in Myanmar, why wouldn't they do the same things you do? Namely, for the same reasons you want to invest in the US, they want to invest as well, because it's a much more honest market, it's a much more liquid market, it's a much fairer market, much more transparent market than their home markets. If you were in Guyana and you won $100 million, do you think you'd invest most of it in Guyana? I don't think so.
Nope.
Now, whether you go through Switzerland to do it or Panama, you would invest in the US, right? Mostly for the same reasons you and I do. That's why we have a trade deficit, because the only way that foreigners can invest in here, that is, invest in our goods, in our financial goods, is to sell us more than they buy from us. They want to buy more from us. Of course they want to buy. You don't think they would like to stay an extra day at Disney? You don't think they'd like to go to Disney? Of course, same as you would. But you know what they want even more? US Treasury bills. You know what they want even more? A really good yielding industrial building. You know what they want even more? Shares in Google. And to do that, they have to sell us more than they buy from us. They have to discipline themselves. And that's the capital surplus exactly equals the trade deficit. So when people say, well, the trade deficit is destroying jobs, no. The trade deficit is the capital surplus, which is creating jobs for guys like us to deal with that foreign money. Some of them are bond traders. Some of them are working at Vanguard. Some of them are working at BlackRock. Some of them. Those trade deficits are creating jobs in financial services. And that is why we have a trade deficit. We have a trade deficit because this is the best market in the world.
I want to pull on a thread about you mentioned the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the United States Empire, and Ray Dalio has famously now said that he thinks that we're at the peak of the American Empire, and he's given some suggestions on how we prolong it. Where are we at in the empire, the United States Empire?
I think we have a long way to go still. Um, I'm a big history fan. I'm addicted to this podcast. The rest is history.
Yes, I've listened
Anybody
to a few.
listens to anybody who enjoys history, you got to go. And I'm just addicted to it. I just finished on Carthage this morning, but there are, I'm sure the Romans thought the empire would never end, and the Carthaginians thought the empire would never end. And they do. I think we got a long way to go. The reason I think we have a long way to go is by and large, it's not a militarily enforced sphere of influence. It is much more a trade and culture driven influence. And I think that that has much more legs than a military. Most of these empires fall because as they get farther and farther afield, they become localized, and as they become localized, the loyalties diminish and the intensity towards the mother country and so forth. And I think we have a long way to go, but mainly because ours is not a military empire. It just isn't. Soviet Union was a military empire. The Ottoman was a military empire. We aren't. It's a cultural and trade empire, if you will, or influence. So I think we have a long way to go. I'm not. Who else would you bet on? Back to our Super Bowl analogy, right? Who else would you bet on? Hard to think of. One of the things that the United States has that's somewhat unusual in the world. There are other places like it, but it's pretty unusual in the world. Certainly unusual versus Europe. I think unusual versus most of Asia is when you grew up and you've done well, most people admire you for doing well. Most people, put aside the current political noise, most people admire Bill Gates and Bezos. And by the way, the person who has turned a garage project into a $10 million company, right? Most of the people in the US look at them and say, good for them. And that could be me, that could be my kid, and good for them. That's not true in Europe. In Europe, they go, well, who do you think you are? There's an envy in Asia. There's a lot of envy in Africa. There's a lot of envy. And a society that celebrates success, especially success not attained by thievery, I think has a lot of legs versus countries that don't celebrate success. They just don't celebrate success. So that's why the Eagles are going to win the next 17 Super Bowls, is because Philadelphia celebrates success.
It's so true, and it's funny because I had that conversation with someone the other day about they're saying, "Wow, they printed so much money and there's all these problems," and I had the same thing as everyone did that. Every country's printed a ton of
Yeah.
money, and they've all got problems. So it's not like the U.S. has created this problem on their own, and every other country's been getting stronger, and there's maybe one that's emerging, like China, which 10 years ago, you might have said that they would have eventually passed the US. They've got, in my mind, way more problems than the US does.
Well, but think of China. Just take China. I'm not picking on China. You may recall there was this very high profile fire in residential building that caused the demonstrations that caused them to finally lift the COVID restrictions. You understand that the reason that that was such a deadly fire is they had welded people into their apartments into the third year of COVID because they were not paying attention. Okay. I think we're going to do okay against a country that welds people into their apartments. I just do. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think we'll do well against that. Um, yeah, I just think that people lose sight of the fact. Look, as I say, I'll be 74 in a couple of weeks. And every year I've been born, since I've been born, you could accurately make a long list of terrible things about this country. Forget its history right now, right? I mean, at every moment since I was born, there were a bunch of terrible things you could say about the country. And most of them would suggest it can't go on, right? And you know what? We are every year better off than the year before. Is everybody better off? No, but by and large, and all you have to do is look at the data. I know over my life, I've seen the people be better off. I mean, imagine just we walk around with a computer in our pocket more powerful than the computer I used at the University of Chicago to do my thesis with, 48 years ago or whatever it was. Everybody's got them. The poor kids in the hood have them, right? Everybody's got them. Everybody, somebody was telling me sociologically, it's just this trivia. I used to go to school half the time with real holes in my shoes, like not theoretical holes. I grew up in a kind of lower income neighborhood, not horrible, and you had two pairs of shoes, one for Sunday and one for everything else. And when they had holes, you had to kind of go until you outgrew them and you stuffed cardboard in them. And I wasn't the only one. Sociologically, you could tell back in those days a rich person from a poor person by looking at their shoes. I challenge you today to look at people in this country's feet and tell me who's rich and poor. Don't look at anything else. Just look. Everybody has the same sneakers. Everybody has the same sneakers, right? Or variations thereof, or shoes thereof. That's an amazing achievement in a country that every day is supposed to have insurmountable problems. And we just lived through, think about what we just lived through. We lived through a pandemic, and we lived through us and the world shutting huge chunks of the economy down for extended periods of time, including not being able to get elective surgery, right? I mean, just kind of can't go to the dentist unless it's an emergency, right? We lived through that and came out the other side better. If that doesn't tell you something about resilience, but by the way, you say, but yeah, our public schools are shit. Yes, they are. And our kids can't read. Yeah, no, they can't. And they have no idea about geography. They don't know if Mexico is to our north or south. That's true. And on and on. And yet. And that's what's amazing over my entire life. Long lists. I remember, not to make this too, when I was 11 was the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think 11. And I remember I went to a youth football game, and my mother said goodbye like she was never going to see me again. And she wasn't an overly warm person in that regard. There were a lot of mothers saying goodbye to their little boys that day, thinking there's going to be a nuclear holocaust in the intervening time. We survived. but I'm old. I'm old.
But you're right. I was born in 80, so I have 45 this year. So not not as my hair isn't as gray as yours yet, but I've 45 years is still enough. And I would
You
echo
see
that.
it.
It's every year. Every year there's something. There's something you could be that you could think, oh, this is it. This it's time to sell everything and just quit and move to a farm. And every year there's some reason to be have angst about the market or about living here. Every year there's some reason, and I've always said this too with real estate. There's always a reason not to do something. Like if you
Yeah.
want to, if you had an opportunity in front of you, there's 10 good reasons why you shouldn't do it at any given time. The reasons will change. It'll be different this year than it will be next year, but there'll always be 10 good reasons not to do it. But there was 10 good reasons not to do it in 1990. And anybody that bought a
And in
property in 1990
1970
and 70
and
and
look, it's not to say everything's perfect. It's a struggle, but it's a struggle that basically has rewards. We just had the 25th anniversary of Linneman letter, and we did a look back to 25 years ago. What was the stock market at? What was the number of employment and so forth? And it's quite stunning along the lines we're talking about, real GDP per capita, et cetera. 25 years, it's amazing. And when you're investing in real estate, you're investing for the long term, right? It's a long term asset.
yeah, yeah, it really is. That's why I always just enjoy getting to hear your perspective on it because you, like, as you mentioned earlier, you cut through the noise. Look, it's not perfect, but there's still a lot of things to be to optimistic about and take a long-term outlook so we can see 17 straight Super Bowls with the Eagles winning it.
There you go.
I'd like
There
to be
you go.
along
And
for
I'll
this.
still be around working at the end of the 17th. So you have to
I'll
promise
still
that
be bugging you to do these interviews.
you'll
So,
still be a kid. But
some
as long
things will
as you
never
still
change.
invite me, yeah, we'll do one at the all right. I
Oh,
don't know if any yeah.
last thing, how's your charity doing? I've supported it along the years, so I get the newsletter. How
We're it's a good example. We're doing amazing. We have an amazing staff who are so dedicated. They're Kenyan. We have some people here in the United States that help us as well. Um, these kids come from staggeringly challenged situations. To see what they're able to achieve when given the opportunity is quite humbling. And we've been doing this now for 20, this is our 22nd year.
Hmm.
So some of them are now old enough to see some, and I am proud of many of them. One of the first ones we took was a girl who was 12 at the time, who was to have been married to someone literally your age as like the fourth wife, and she refused and had the courage to run away. And they beat her, and they brought her, and they beat her, and she ran, and we just were beginning then. And the lady who runs the program happened to find out about this young woman. Remember, this is 22 years ago, so she's now 34. Well, we put her in our program. She went to school. She got a undergraduate bachelor degree. She owns two or three little hotels with maybe 8 rooms each or 10 rooms each for local tourists. She owns maybe 12 apartment units for local people. She's become a leader in her community. That girl's life could have been over. And we just gave her a chance to become what, and she's not done. I mean, she's still young. And, I could give you other stories, but that one just moves you. On the other hand, I say to people, if you think you've got a problem with your 3 kids, I've got 150, and we've already graduated like 250. So you can imagine the headaches. And, we celebrate the successes and we cry at the failures. We had a terrible, terrible situation just before Christmas of one of our girls, not a girl, she was a woman. She had been in the program since she was about a sophomore in high school, graduated university, had a good job, got promoted, blah, 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 had a baby, husband, got baby. Um, and was struggling, and she killed the child and killed herself, and you just kind of go, that's all you can say is that's life. And if you're not willing to help, you're not willing to have such. We kind of increased our awareness of mental support and so forth. Um, we don't just pay tuition. We try to do what parents do, which is expose them to things in the world. And um, we do it in a lot of ways. And I encourage anybody to go to see Sam Save a Mind. It's Sam, S-A-M, Elimu, E-L-I-M-U. Elimu is education and Swahili, or you can go to Linneman Associates and you can get linked in there. But there's some very cool stories and more successes than failures. Um, but we're doing great. We're doing great. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, well, it's a charity that, like I said, I've supported in the past, and I'd recommend people check that out because I really do admire you for that 22 years you've been doing that, and I'm sure that there's been a lot of success. I'm sure there's been a lot of heartbreak along the way, as you mentioned. So good on you for doing that. I
Well,
always
thank
just do
you.
want to bring attention to that, but we're past our time. I always value every minute that I get with you, so I apologize for taking 10 extra.
It's fine. It's
Uh,
been it's been great fun as always. So have a great day.
okay, you as well, Dr. Linneman. Thank you once again. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Uh, okay, thanks, Dr. Linneman.
All right. Be good.
Okay,
Have a great day,
you
guys.
too. Thanks once
Bye
again.
bye.
Bye.